What's going on, everyone? It's Bales, and welcome back to another episode of AFL Fantasy Head2Head. We've put two players up against each other to see who we're going to be picking in our AFL Fantasy side for 2024. This is episode 3. Obviously, we had a couple of good guests on. Obviously, Warney jumped on to discuss Grundy and Cherry, and then Liam was on to discuss Tom Stewart and Jack Sinclair. Today, we move on to Port Adelaide duo, and joining me on this episode is legend in the fantasy community, and you can find him on the coaches panel all throughout the year and also on Twitter at MiniMonk. And it is MiniMonk joining me. MiniMonk, mate, how you doing?
Yeah, not going too badly. And, this should be a very interesting conversation. We've got two players from the same midfield, same team, but slightly different ownerships and slightly different prices as well.
Yeah, exactly right. So, yeah, we're talking about Connor Rozee and Zach Butters. Did this episode last year, actually. So I had Louis on, but we didn't want the bias this time. No, I'm joking, Louis. Love you, Louis. We're getting he's going to be jumping on episode at some point throughout these head-to-head videos. But yeah, Connor Rozee and Zach Butters. I'll be taking Connor Rozee today, and MiniMonk will be taking Zach Butters. I think that I think I know who I'm going to be picking out of these two, but it'd be very interesting to discuss both and also get a bit of a discussing the buy that they've got. So let's get stuck in with those. So Connor Rozee is 956K after his 106 average last year. I think that the best argument to be starting with Connor Rozee in your side for 2024 is his ton run that he went on last year. So from rounds 10 through to 24, he only went under 100 on one occasion. So, and that was an 89 against Freo in round 23. So he had, I'm just counting up here, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 hundreds in a row, which is very, very nice. And it just shows that he's been able to elevate his floor a little bit. In past years, he's been able to put up these 60 scores and even some 50s. But last year, had a low score of 69 against Sydney in round 4. But besides that, his lowest score was 79. So he's really good for an 80-plus a game. But he's also got that ceiling as well. Scores of 138 against Richmond in the final game of the season was his highest score. Got a score of 133 against West Coast in round 6 and a few 120s there as well. So obviously new captain of Port Adelaide this year as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how he goes. I'd love to get the stats. I might have to see what Jaden says about it. Stats when players become captain, if that sort of raises their game, whatever. But MiniMonk, what are your thoughts of Connor Rozee going into the obviously, as I said, being the captain and sort of that safe? He's pretty safe for 100 last year, sort of in the back, sort of 2/3 to 3/4 of the season. So what do you see with Connor Rozee heading into 2024?
Yeah, I mean, he was a very safe player to have. He's a very good forward to have. And I think the very interesting thing about both these players is they've gone from being forward players to being pure mids, and yet both retain a huge amount of relevance because they're still relatively young and there's still potential for just natural development and growth in their scores as a result of that. So I think that Rozee in particular is the one who gets the higher amount of CBAs out of the two. Like he averaged 70% CBAs for the entire season, and I think Butters was closer towards that 60% marker, but there's a bit of a reason why that was, and we'll get to that in a minute. But if you're wanting a bit more of that role stability, I think it comes from Rozee. He's not the player that's going to be pushing forward or pushing outside. He's going to be the one that's the in and under midfielder. They've shown that they have a tendency to want to play him there, and giving him the captaincy only means that that's just going to continue from here on forward. So I think that that's the positive that you can draw towards someone like Connor Rozee.
Yeah, and it's going to be very interesting. So I'd be interested to get your take because we'll talk about, I think, a bit more when we talk about Zach Butters. But how do you see the sort of the tag potential going between these two? Because obviously these two are fantastic footballers, and we saw sort of Rozee have games last year where he took over, and Butters where he took over. Obviously had that great patch we'll discuss with Butters during the season. But how do you see it playing out? Because I could see it going, Rozee's a captain, maybe shut him, the leader of the team, down. But I could also go, well, Butters at times was arguably the most influential part of the comp last year in some games. So where do you sort of see that sort of playing out? Or do you just see maybe they don't tag and go head-to-head because they're both so good?
I don't know. I think the teams do tend to want to push a tag onto a particular player if they think that that's the player that's going to kill them on the inside. And I think at the start of the season, most teams probably thought that was Rozee. And I think there was a bit of a shift in mindset partway through the season as Butters started to become a lot more impactful in games. You mentioned that patch where he was a dominant player. There was a patch in the second half of the season where he was arguably the best player in the game. He was winning games off of his boot, and he was very impactful with his disposal quality as well. It's probably going to vary depending on who they think is having a up patch for the particular team, and whether or not that they see that continuing. I think that, you know, depending on how a particular player is going or whether they're on a hot run at any particular point, will be who the teams will tag. So I can see that it goes between the two of them, but I think it's more likely to be starting on Butters at this stage, just because of the way that he ended that 2023 season.
Yeah, and that could be what sways you to Rozee. Maybe I know it's a little bit more expensive than Zach Butters, but could be what sort of sways your way. The captain, maybe less of a tag threat. But I think both these players have shown, even last year when they did get attention at games, I think they showed an ability to be able to fill other stat lines. If they were being tagged, they'd be able to tackle a bit. Rozee, in his case, maybe able to push forward and kick a couple of goals. Butters also the same as well. So I don't see the tag being a huge issue for either player. Would you tend to agree with that as well?
To an extent, we don't have a massive sample size of these two players having to work through a tag. I think that Butters has the ability to be able to work through a tag a little bit better than what Rozee does, just because I think he has a little bit more spread compared to what Rozee does, and that allows him to be able to get involved and potentially run a tag off his feet, especially if it's a tagger that's playing the inside midfielder. Like a lot of the common taggers these days tend to do. Only really if Finn McGuinness is the one that tags hard on the outside and can burn players really hard by running with them for an entire day. But again, it's also about how many games do you see them being tagged in as well. Like we always hype the tag up to be this massive issue in the preseason. We did it last preseason with Nick Dacos. But in reality, it might only be 2 or 3 games a year. And if it's the difference between a player going 110 down to an 80, yes, it's 30 points in any particular game. But if 80 is the floor that the player has, you're taking that to a bank. Like we saw so many times last year. It's the ones that hurt you are the 60s and the 50s. Like if you get a premium score in that really hurts a week. But if you've got the ability to work through a tag, which I think these two players can, and be able to salvage a like half respectable score, I think that's the difference.
Yeah, and I fully agree with that as well. And we have seen the players in the past, obviously, as you said, popular options go these sort of sub 70 scores and really impact your score. And I guess when these players have got a tag coming up, if you're looking at them potentially as a captain option, you just obviously just steer away from them for that week and just hope they can get, as you said, like an 80 or even a 90 score, and that'd be fine. But really only team that tags fully is Hawthorn. I think there's a few other teams that float tags, but like going through the few stats with some players, it's like Freo tagged times last year. I don't see Ace tagging this year with Young moving in there, where the Young does run with it. I don't think they're really hard tags. Kerno's gone from the Blues. Ryan Clark's no longer at Sydney. So I don't think there's actually, as you said, that the tag's probably a little bit overblown at times. And it might just be sometimes during a game where a team will just go, this guy's being way too influential. We just got to chuck someone on him. And that's sort of where the tag sort of comes from a little bit. But the final point I'll sort of go with Rozee, and I'll sort of do this to lead into Butters, is that we've obviously got opening round, got the early buys. But the thing that is so good about these two players and being premiums in the midfield is the fact that they don't have a buy in the first 6 weeks. And they also got that buy in round 13. I know MJ was talking to you about it on the Coach Pen of 50 most relevant. If you guys haven't tuned into any of those, I'm sure all of you guys have by now. But if you haven't, make sure you do. It's one of my favorite series every year. Listen to it, and you just get a different perspective on some of the players you might not have considered. But as you guys discussed, the round 13 buy, because a lot of people might have not looked at these yet, is only Port Adelaide and Fremantle, which means that especially prems in these teams are extra valuable, like Gold Coast and Geelong were last year. How much of a factor is that when you're looking at picking a guy like Zach Butters or Connor Rozee into your side? Is that something that's going to sway you in that direction?
It's definitely something that I'm considering. Like, we saw it last year. It was very tricky last year because we had Gold Coast and Geelong who weren't players. They weren't teams that had massively relevant players as premiums, aside from, Touk Miller, Noah Anderson, Tom Stewart. But even then, really only Tom Stewart was the top liner for those two teams. Whereas across Fremantle and Port Adelaide, there's as many as 4 or even 5 that you could argue could be top of their lines. You've got the 2 Port Adelaide boys that we're talking about today. And then you've got Hayden Young, Caleb Sarong, and Andrew Brayshaw, who could all be top of their line as well. And that makes it a lot more interesting because instead of being bereft of options and only having to pick the 1 or 2 that makes the most amount of sense because of limited options, you can actually pick and choose which are the ones you want to go for. Like if you like all of, say, Brayshaw, Rozee, and Young, just pick all three of them. And then you've got three premium players that are going to play every other week of the buys, and they just have that week off where you're going to be fielding 25 or 26 players anyways. So I think that's a really, really good way to look at it, and a really something to factor into your starting selections as well, especially if there's other reasons why you'd like them as a starting pick.
Yeah, exactly right, and I fully agree as well. Now, if people are watching on the video as well, well, I hope you are. There has been lag at times, so if you have noticed that, apologies for that. I don't think it's too bad now, but if there has been, just apologies. We did try and fix it before. It just sort of bugs and things. We thought we'd still record it anyway and get the video out to everyone. So, but yeah, also make sure you do leave a like as well on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. But yeah, so let's lean to Zach Butters, MiniMonk. So why should Zach Butters be? We've touched him at times throughout the Rozee chat, but focusing on Butters now, why should people be selecting him in 2024?
Well, let's start with the obvious one. He's 7 points cheaper. He's 50K cheaper than Rozee. He's under the 900K barrier, and he's someone that we could foresee is potentially averaging 110. And that's where we're really value hunting for players in our starting squads. You're wanting players that are priced at that, 95 to 100 market that can take that next step. You only have to look back to last year to see 3 players that took that step. Tom Green took that step. Caleb Sarong took that step. And, even to an extent, LDU started to take that step as well before he got injured.
Bont as well.
Bont as well.
Bont
is another one who took that step.
And he went to 117, yeah.
Exactly. And these are the types of players that become immensely valuable because they're not just players that give you value in your starting squad and make cash. They become season-long keepers. And so if you can get Zach Butters at under 900K and he becomes a top 8 midfielder and a season keeper for you with that round 13 bye, only missing the one game, that's huge for your starting squad. But then we've got to look at why. Why is there the potential that he can go 110? If we look at the first 3 games that he had last year, he had low CBAs in those games. I think he had under 50% in all 3 of them. He wasn't playing the same role that he did for the rest of the season. So if we just drop those 3 games and just look at the games where he went up in 50% of CBAs or more, which is every other game after that. So that's a clear role shift. His average goes to 104. From 99 to 104, just like that. That's a huge jump in terms of your value. But then you've also got to realize that he had a game where he was injured at halftime. He finished the game on 68, and he basically didn't score in the second half because he didn't get any time on ground. He finished on 68 points. He had 69% time on ground. If you take that game out as well, let's say that injured game falls out, that then goes to 106. Yeah. And then we've got the fact that he's still a young player. There's still natural development to come. They're only going to want to trust Rozee and Butters more in that midfield mix. So his CBA could potentially go up even further to, say, a 65, 70% average. The world's his oysters. There's a world where he can go 110. And it's the same world that Rozee can go 110 as well, because those two have got the keys to the midfield, and they could do the same thing as what Brayshaw and Sarong did for Fremantle. Yeah. And if they're both top 8 midfielders, you want the one that's got the more value. You want the one that's 60K cheaper. Yeah. So then you got the argument, I think then the counterpoint for a lot of people as well, Rozee's the one that's less injury prone. He hasn't got injured as much through his career, and that's definitely true. But Butters didn't get injured last year. There was the groin, but then he came back for the next game.
Sorry as well. I think from memory, watching that game, Ken Hinkley said that he could have come back in the game. It wasn't actually that big of a deal. It was just that they were down by, might have been 10 goals or whatever against Carlton. It was a blowout. So they just thought, let's rest him and play him for next week. Yeah,
and I mean, the next week he came back, and I think he went 100 odd against Sydney. So he clearly wasn't. He went 105 against Collingwood at Adelaide Oval. He wasn't too bad that he was completely done and out. But, when it's a good player, when it's a player that's influential to your team, you don't want to overexhaust them. And if they're slightly injured, then, rest them up a little bit. So then the other argument then is floor and ceiling. So floor and ceiling is massive for your rookie player. For your premium players, and it's particularly important for players at the start of the season when you don't have as many captaincy options. Because if you're picking Butters, he's probably sitting at an M3 for you, maybe an M2, maybe an M4, which means he's probably going to be one of those players that you're relying to put the VC and C on. Now, his floor, if we exclude the games at the start of the season where he wasn't playing that midfield role and the game where he got injured, he had 1 game below 80, and it was a 77. He had another 5 games below 100, but they were all around about that 88 marker. So it's not dreadful floor. Like when you look at it, it's the 60s and 50s, like those tag games that really hurt you. But if you got an 80 as a floor, it's not that bad. But his ceiling in the back half of 2023 was huge. Like he had that 148 game against the Demons. He had 130 odd against the Cats. He had 129 against the Hawks. Like if you get those as a captaincy punt early on in the season and you can get a VC or a C on them, that's great. They've got a good early run. So this is good for both Rozee and for Butters. So that's great. But yeah, I mean, both of them have comparable ceiling. Both of them have comparable floor. Both of them have comparable upside in terms of being able to hit a 110 marker. So then the simple part is, what's your poison? Do you want the player that potentially has a bit more of an injury risk associated with him, but is cheaper? Or do you want the player that doesn't have as much of an injury risk associated with him and is a little bit more expensive? And with the way that I like to play fantasy, I tend to take a few more risks than most other coaches. I'm 100% targeting that 60, 70K that you can save on Butters compared to Rozee, because that can make the difference with the rest of your starting squad.
Yeah. No, all very, very good points as well. And looking at their run, like there's only probably a couple of games where that like maybe they're not going to go big, but just to read them out, you got West Coast in round one, Adelaide Oval, Richmond the MCG, Melbourne Adelaide Oval, Essendon Adelaide Oval, Freo Adelaide Oval, Collingwood MCG, St Kilda Adelaide Oval, Adelaide Oval, Geelong at GMHBA, Hawthorn Adelaide Oval, North at Blundstone, then Carlton Adelaide Oval, then the bye. So really it's that round 10 game, does Finn McGuinness go to him or Rose? That's going to be very interesting to see. Probably depends on how their first 9 weeks go. The Crows showdown, but then again, that can always sort of be a different result. Some players can go big, some players can't. But most often, well, other games they look pretty good. So mixed with that, with the fact that with the no early bye, the really good buy in round 13, I think that picking one of these players is quite a good strategy, and sort of one that might go a little bit on the radar, because I don't think, again, a lot of people are probably going to look at these two like they do, like all of us do it as well. We look at the defenders that lose defender status and go to straight mids. Look at like your Lairds, your Mills, even like Doherty. You're not selecting this year, but you never know, could go and average 110 when he comes back after his bye. But there's that bias of, he's not defender anymore, not forward anymore. Like this year, like look, Taranto, Goulden, Dunkley, Butters and Rozee, obviously we're talking about now. Taranto, like all these players have lost forward status, and we're sort of considering a few of these guys, and these two are ones that we're considering. But so the time's come to sort of pick who we'd be going out of the two. So I think you sort of allude a little bit to it before, MiniMonk, but who are you picking between Butters and Rozee?
I'm going with the crowd at the moment, and it's currently showing the ownership statistics. I think Butters is about 18%, Rozee is about the 10% marker, which isn't exactly low, especially for players that have lost that DPP. But I'm going with the crowd, and I'm going Butters. I'd be picking Butters of the two, and I do currently actually have Butters in my side.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that in a sec as well. But yeah, I'm going Butters as well, and I've currently got Butters in my side as well. I was saying you just before we recorded that I'm not sort of confident with having Butters in, but especially with some of the discussion you're raising there, and that it's made me feel a bit better about picking Butters, and yeah, he's currently sitting as my M3. Is he M3 for you as well?
He is also currently sitting at M3 for me as well.
Yeah. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how these two go in 2024. And as we said, with that really good buy in round 13, that could be a really good strategy to pick a premium or a few premiums, as you mentioned, with the two teams on there in your starting squad. But MiniMonk, that's what we're going to cut it there for the head-to-head. But, mate, appreciate you coming on. Obviously, you come on last year as well, so backing up this year with another episode, mate. Where can the people find you on the socials, and where can people find you on the coaches panel, and what do you got coming up in 2024?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at MiniMonk10, or X as they call it nowadays. And yeah, I'm with the coaches panel, so I've been jumping on for a few episodes of the 50 most relevant. I'll be on for a few more. There might be a few dockers to come between now and number one. So let's see how many there is left. I won't spoil how many there are left. And those are being released on Spotify and also on YouTube and on Patreon as well. And yeah, I'll be jumping on for their weekly roundtables, strategy discussions throughout the season as well.
Yeah, beautiful. No, definitely go and follow MiniMonk and go follow the coaches panel. As I say, get around the 50 most relevant, because it is a really good discussion about a lot of players that maybe you guys haven't considered yet, especially some of those round zero players that have got the early buys. And yeah, let us know in the comments if you're starting either Butters or Rozee in your side. Let us know what your thoughts are on each of them. And any other questions, put them in the chat as well. Make sure you do leave a like on the video if you did enjoy the content. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're on our radar 2,000 subscribers. Same with the ball boys, Mitch and Luke over there. So go subscribe to them as well while you're at it as well. But yeah, on the road to 2,000. So appreciate it. Next episode, we'll be coming with another special guest. Haven't locked in exactly which two are going to be on the next episode because this will be released. Obviously, it's been released on the Friday, but it'll be on the Monday. So we'll have to see who the special guest and the next two players coming up for in that one. And until that episode, we'll catch you guys in the next one. So we're out. Cheers.